Rory, the Middle East was always the easy bit because the United States is the main problem everywhere. Everywhere in the Middle East. Like, if we just have to stop doing stupid things, and that is what Donald Trump has done this week in both Syria and Yemen.
Hello and welcome to the More Freedom Foundation podcast. I am Rory, in charge of podcasting, and with me as always is Robert Morris. Now, Robert, do you recognize me?
I do recognize you, Rory.
Because that makes you quite a bit better than the last president of America. Did you hear about this?
This is Biden stuff.
Yes, this is Biden stuff.
Mhm.
So at a fundraiser, he didn't recognize who George Clooney was.
Wow.
So apparently there's a tell-all book coming out shortly. For those who don't know, George Clooney, one of the most famous men in the world, and one of the many fundraiser things for the Democrats he is in charge of. And when Biden had to meet him, he didn't know who he was, and that's why George Clooney, about 2 weeks later, rose the alarm and said, "This man isn't fit to run a country."
It is, I think, a testament to just sort of how ridiculous the Democrats are now, that George Clooney was the guy who had to be like, hey, like some Hollywood actor fundraiser was the biggest adult in the room when it came to Joe Biden's decline. It's interesting. I think Jake Tapper, of all people, who I think most would say participated in this cover-up of Biden's decline, is apparently now doing a book tour for a tell-all, in-depth discussion, exposing the lies that he helped perpetuate, which is, I think, as I think I've said before, Rory, if we never have to talk about Joe Biden again, it'll be too soon. Not a fan of Joe Biden, and also not a fan of Donald Trump, which makes today's episode a little bit awkward, honestly. I'm simultaneously a little bit bummed out, but also just kind of excited.
Because he got a new plane.
Huh?
Because
yes, I'm excited about the plane. Very excited about the plane. And it's fascinating how a bunch of Israel superfans and standard war hawks in Washington, D.C. have all of a sudden discovered that Qatar is bribing U.S. politicians. This has been a very established, and admittedly, the idea that Qatar is going to replace Air Force One is incredibly ridiculous, and so ridiculous that I almost wonder if it has been floated so that the Democrats and Republicans can defeat something that's really obviously stupid, and then pay less attention to the billions of dollars of other bribes that they're getting from Saudi Arabia, that they're getting from the crypto industry, that they're getting from all of U.S. business. It is interesting, the fact that this Qatar announcement is sort of happening at the same time as Donald Trump actually doing some really useful stuff in the Middle East that I have wanted to happen for years now. I think the title of this episode, which is accurate, I don't think anybody else would really describe it this way, but I think it is fair to describe it this way, is that over the past week and a half or so, Rory, Donald Trump has ended 2 Middle Eastern wars. 2 of them.
Before we get into this, what do you think? Trump seems to like he's had a long time, I'm anti-war and this, that, and the other. And quite often U.S. presidents say that. And then as soon as they get in, it's the surge or whatever.
Yeah.
Are you impressed that Donald Trump is kind of able to maintain this?
I am, well, impressed would overstate it. I think he's actually doing what he said he was going to do. In the first Trump administration, he hired a bunch of people who were either incapable or frankly unwilling and spent their time working for him, obstructing what he wanted to do. It seems to be less the case this time around. I think perhaps there are a lot of reasons why he is more successful in the Middle East than he was in the first term. There are some facts on the ground that have changed in very significant ways, mostly the role of Saudi Arabia. Up until 2019, Saudi Arabia was one of the biggest warmongers in the region, had sort of bought into this Sunni versus Shia ideology, this idea that Saudi Arabia was the ruler of the Muslim world and the Islamic Republic of Iran was threatening that somehow. And then in 2019, they got a real dose of reality. towards the end of the Trump administration when the Houthis, in cooperation with the Iranians, maybe it was just the Iranians, conducted a missile attack that knocked out like half of Saudi Arabia's oil production capacity.
It's not fair when the other side fights back.
It's terrible. It's terrible, Rory. How dare they? Yeah, so Yemen essentially established deterrence with Saudi Arabia. That particular attack may have, I mean, there's getting into the minutia of what actually happened there. The Houthis claim credit. Maybe it was just the Iranians or it was the Houthis using Iranian technology. But what happened was Saudi Arabia learned. Saudi Arabia was like, wait a second. If we get this big U.S.-Iran war that we've been trying to create for a decade now, we're going to get destroyed. And that's sort of the theme of this episode is strangely learning things. And Washington, D.C. appears to be utterly incapable of learning things. But Donald Trump, actually, this monster of self-regard, this 78-year-old former reality television star, is better at foreign policy than anybody in Washington, D.C. That's a really low bar, but it's just the fact because he is capable of learning things. So Saudi Arabia, since 2019, has been working pretty hard to rebuild bridges with Iran, to desperately try to make a deal with the Houthis because, you know, the Houthis can bomb them back now after the Saudis bombed the Houthis pretty mercilessly between 2015 and 2019. So that's like sort of like a fundamental baseline that has changed in the Middle East, which does make what Trump's been doing this week a lot more possible. However, it's also the success that Donald Trump is having in the Middle East is just a sign of just how like pervertedly, like insanely stupid U.S. Middle East policy is. One of the reasons why Trump and Witkoff are pushing fairly hard in the Middle East towards peace is because they're realizing that a lot of the other things they talked about are a lot harder.
That's kind of scary.
Well, no, not really. I mean, it's just...
Yeah, but to be like, oh, the Middle East was the easy bit.
But that's the thing, Rory. The Middle East was always the easy bit.
Oh, God.
Because the United States is the main problem everywhere. Everywhere in the Middle East. Like, if we just have to stop doing stupid things. And that is what Donald Trump has done this week in both Syria and Yemen. He has just stopped doing stupid things. And by the U.S. president not doing stupid things, the Middle East automatically gets better. And perhaps this is something that I should take to heart, that actually maybe, I don't concede this, but it is true that Russia and Ukraine is a more difficult problem that a new president can't just come in and instantly shift. I think there are more things that Trump could do to shift it, but in China, obviously, as Trump has shown with his complete capitulation on tariffs, China is not to be pushed around very easily. So I think perhaps the reason why Trump has taken these actions around his much ballyhooed first foreign trip, this is now his sort of a sign of Trump's corruption, is that there was this great list of what's the first foreign country that each president visited.
We are deeply honored. President Obama has chosen Canada for his first foreign visit since taking office. His election to the presidency launches a new chapter in the rich history of Canada-U.S. relations. It is a relationship between allies, partners, neighbors, and the closest of friends.
It's always Canada or Mexico or the United Kingdom or some other like big-time ally.
Well, I kept hearing there's always like a big thing, like what's the first European country he's going to visit, and then everyone's happy if it's them, that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's an incredible prize. Both times Donald Trump has gone to the place that can give him the most money personally. And that means Saudi Arabia both times.
Wow.
And this trip was Saudi Arabia, it was Qatar, it was the United Arab Emirates, and his actions here are timed to match with that trip that I think is probably, as we're recording, is probably just closing down, but it was sort of the week of May, 11th through 16th or what have you.
Because, for instance, doesn't he say he's going to keep the jet once he's not president?
So we're talking about the Qatar. So Qatar has offered to replace Air Force One, which seems insane. And then, no, he's not going to keep it, Rory. It's going to go to his presidential library.
Yes, because libraries always need jets.
This is obviously corruption beyond caricature.
At least it's a Boeing. It would be funny if it was an Airbus.
It would be. And yeah, but like we want Boeing to, well, I suppose has Air Force One been traditionally Boeing? Anyway, that it's the corruption is obvious. That's just the baseline. But honestly, Rory, if outsized corruption is helping Donald Trump finish the wars in Yemen and Syria, that's just fine by me. Frankly, I love that.
It's a bit like sometimes politicians do the right thing historically because they want to stay in power.
Yeah, yeah. It is interesting that the Gulf monarchies, because of 120, I mean, I'm a big guy saying, military action doesn't solve anything, but actually, that Iranian Houthi military action against Saudi Arabia solved a lot because the Gulf actors, the UAE will sort of follow along with Saudi Arabia publicly anyway, while sort of doing its own agenda on a deeper level that often hurts Saudi Arabia. But it does seem with Saudi Arabia's shift, the UAE is sort of in line and Qatar is always a little bit more peace-oriented. And all the big money in the Gulf wants peace with Iran now and wants the region to just sort of have a break. Part of this is because the Gulf won. We've talked a lot about how the Arab Spring was mostly a very successful counter-revolution against a bunch of monarchists against democracy. With the fall of Tunisia's democracy, and was it 2021 already? That long ago already? The fall of Tunisia's democracy completed their post-Arab Spring plan. All the democracies have been crushed, and now they're like, oh, well, maybe we should actually try to rebuild the region and not be destroyed by a massive war between the United States and Iran. So what is different in this Trump term from the first Trump term is that, and certainly from the Obama administration, is that the Gulf actors are actually working towards peace. And if it takes a $400 million plane gifted to Donald Trump to do that, which I kind of expect at this point will be stopped by the Democrats and the Republicans, who find it just such an obvious and humiliating.
There's just something, if you imagine you accept corruption, like the idea of accepting like a jumbo jet, like is beyond my imagination.
Which kind of leads me to believe that it was almost consciously crafted to provide an easy victory for anti-corruption Trump people, so all the other corruption can continue.
Because I've even heard stuff like, oh, should politicians not be allowed to do insider trading anymore, which I found hilarious.
Why did you find that hilarious?
Well, is that not kind of the deal? It's like you can make a lot of money from insider trading. I know they shouldn't ethically, I'm against it, but I feel like it was always a bit of a sort of nudge, nudge, wink, wink.
No, I think it's still illegal for Congress people to engage in insider trading if they actually know. Much is made of Nancy Pelosi's trades, but like Nancy Pelosi's trades aren't like crazy, like, ooh, how did Nancy Pelosi do so well? It's like, I've done a lot better on the stock market than Nancy Pelosi, and I made like one good choice. Like it's not like anybody, and if perhaps it's a broader scandal that anybody with any money in the United States has gotten like 20% returns for the past like 5-10 years. Trump is definitely doing like illegal insider trading. Like it is, well, no, it's not illegal because it's on the crypto markets.
Or he tweets on Truth Social to buy now when he's about to lift the tariffs.
But that's the thing, Rory. That's not insider trading.
Oh.
Because if he tweets buy now to the public, that's not insider trading. The point with what insider trading
Well, there were people that bought before he did that, so there is evidence that people did know what was going to happen.
So those people and if those connections can be made, there's something for the SEC to go after. Of course, Trump has been eviscerating the Securities and Exchange Commission, so that's less likely. But no, if Trump tweets it out, it's public information. Now is a great time to buy, which I think he's done twice. And accurately, if you had done what Trump had said on those two occasions, you would have made a killing on the stock market. But no, I mean, Trump's corruption is so much bigger than a $400 million airplane. Kushner has gotten commitments of billions of dollars, Trump's son-in-law, billions of dollars from the Saudis. Like it is obscene. It is one of the most, certainly the most egregiously corrupt administration in dollar amounts in U.S. history, and probably just in any terms at all since at least the Harding administration of the 1920s, and probably since the 19th century, before we had any laws at all. So it is, I mean, Trump is comically, egregiously corrupt. Trump is using the Department of Homeland Security as a personal Gestapo. Trump is something that people don't talk enough about is the way that Trump is undermining basic reality. A lot of how markets trade, a lot of our understanding of how the world is going, how the economy is going, is based on U.S. government data collection, which used to be sort of still the gold standard, of honesty and probity. And like when the United States says what its GDP is or its unemployment numbers are, people believe that, like all the Bureau of Labor Statistics stuff. And Trump is taking an axe to all of it. It's not just the BLS. There are many, many, many information gathering systems throughout the U.S. government. And Trump is like, that's the thing that Trump is doing that honestly bothers me the most, that we're getting to a point like where if Trump yields economic catastrophe by the end of this term, like he'll be able to just lie about it because
Nobody to check him.
exactly. So that, I mean, but like we don't need to do another episode about how crappy Donald Trump is.
This is about how brilliant Donald Trump is.
Yes, actually. Yeah, no, like this is and I'm not saying Trump is smart. I'm not saying Trump is good. I'm saying that US policy was so incredibly malicious and stupid in the Middle East that Donald Trump just going like, meh, we're not going to do that anymore, is a drastic improvement. We did see this briefly in the first Trump administration. One of the only good things he did was he cut off funding to jihadists in Syria. He cut off that funding and then, oh, wow, the Islamic State was quickly defeated. It's weird how that happened. And just Trump's ability to look at something and be like, even I know this is stupid, and having a degree of political independence from U.S. defense contractors, from everybody in Washington, D.C., that he doesn't particularly care whether, they like him or not.
But he is still popular. Like, I know approval ratings overall, but Trump does have a certain sort of charisma about him that means he can be quite ignorant and be like, nah, I'm not doing this anymore.
Yeah, and that's in for both Syria and Yemen, that worked out really, really well. I think we'll go into Yemen in detail. There's this amazing New York Times article, which I would recommend that everybody reads, called Why Trump Suddenly Declared Victory Over the Houthi Militia. It's a solid reporting, I guess, from the New York Times, Washington, D.C. Bureau, with a bunch of other folks, that just outlines like how ridiculous the planning was here. We ran an episode after Signalgate. Everybody wanted to talk about with the Signal chat, that with the journalists, about how that was a breach of security. I think what we emphasized was just how stupid and short-sighted all of this discussion of Yemen war was. And I'm delighted to
But
report,
it was nice that they saved Europe. We were about to run out of food there, and
yes, exactly. So they were talking about how they were gonna charge Europe once they'd restored the Red Sea, and obviously they've done none of that.
because you
But
can't go around Africa or anything and just pay a bit more in shipping.
Yeah. But what I want to talk about before we get into the Yemen thing, which illustrates a lot of Washington, D.C. stupidity and Donald Trump doing the right thing, I want to talk about the Syria sanctions, because that happened just this week. I'm not entirely certain that it is happening.
Okay.
Because people, this is Donald Trump. He'll say something, and then people that he has hired will sabotage it, and it ends up not happening. So actually, the Syria sanctions are a great test of Donald Trump, and whether the second Trump administration is any different from the first Trump administration, where he made lots of great announcements about Syria and never followed through. This is a great test, and it's a very complex test. Hilariously, you're familiar with the Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren?
Yeah.
She's famous for Trump helped to make her more famous for the questions about whether she actually had Native American ancestry. But she's actually quite an impressive, sort of like a Bernie Sanders light. She created the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which we did a whole episode on Trump destroying. Like I like Elizabeth Warren. I'm a Warren fan, and that's rare for me to say. But
a Warren warrior.
I tried to be a Warren warrior briefly in 2020, but she didn't get very far.
Oh.
But she's very progressive. And it's very funny because now she's allied with Donald Trump. Warren, and surprisingly, I don't understand anything about Joe Wilson. He is a 77-year-old South Carolina Republican congressperson who, for some reason, really wants to advocate for the Syrian government. So apparently, up until 2 days ago, Elizabeth Warren and Joe Wilson were waging a no-hope fight to lift Syria's sanctions in a bipartisan way. And now Donald Trump has thrown all of his weight behind that, and that is
Wow.
some considerable weight. We've talked about the Caesar sanctions before, right?
Yeah.
So the United States has been sanctioning Syria through a variety of different programs that Donald Trump does have direct control over and should all be in the process of being lifted. I mean, Trump said it was happening. His
Is
Treasury
Israel
said
against this? Because, quite a lot of this article we're talking about is basically he's not doing everything Israel wants indefinitely.
Israel is very against this. In fact, with both these Syria and Yemen stories, Trump has acted directly against
A
Israel's.
lot of this seems to have happened as soon as Waltz has been kicked out.
That might have something to do with it. Waltz is definitely a lot more hawkish. I think Waltz was, as you can see from this Yemen article we're going to go through, was always kind of like behind the curve and like desperately trying to do more hawkish stuff and
Yeah.
kind of failing. But it is striking. So on May 6th, Donald Trump announced that the U.S. was done fighting the Houthis. On May 4th, 2 days before, the Houthis had bombed Ben Gurion Airport in Israel, had successfully hit. They didn't actually hurt anybody or disrupt any serious operations, but they sent a missile from Yemen that hit the Israeli airport, which is obviously an airport is a rather large target, but they made, so basically,
But it's kind of perfect, the fact that no one was killed, and it sends a message you've hit an actually legitimate target.
Yeah, so it's an indication that, and of course, this May 4th hit.
But it also reminds me of what Britain did to Argentina in the Falklands. They
How
were able
so?
to hit They were able to hit an airport on their mainland, which basically meant they took a lot of stuff away from where they were fighting in the Falklands and then brought it back because they were like, Britain could actually attack us because they've hit us on our mainland. So the fact that this country that was seen as a joke for a long time is like, here you go. How does this make you feel?
So this isn't the first time that Yemen has demonstrated that capacity, but to actually hit the airport is a big deal. That was on May 4th. And so basically, the Houthis successfully strike Israel in the most impressive way on May 4th. And on May 6th, Trump's like, we're making peace with the Houthis. We give up. So this is very much against what Israel wanted. Last week, or the week before, Smotrich, I think it was, one of the truly nasty guys in the Israeli cabinet, that for some reason the New York Times pretends they're not actually in the government, but they're very much in the government, basically came out straight out and admitted, we want to keep Syria divided and defeated, and we're going to keep bombing it, we're going to keep invading it, and we're going to make sure that there can be no...
Syria's doing its best to basically be on their good side, and
Yeah.
Israel has captured land that was Syrian.
Yep. And they are continuing to, I think they're still bombing, though might have slowed down a little bit since the sanctions relief.
And they did the odd attack on Lebanon as well.
Oh, of course. So last week, but again, to your point that Israel doesn't like this, last week, the Israeli government came out and said, our plan is to keep Syria poor, weak, and divided. And then this week, Trump comes in and says, actually, we're going to lift the sanctions so Syria can rebuild.
Because the gist of the sanctions is they were against Assad, and it meant that essentially they're getting no money. And now it's a new government. It's completely been devastated for over a decade. So they desperately need any money. And they were like, no, we still think you're Assad, but with a different hat on.
Yeah, it was absolutely indefensible, insane, obscene. Elizabeth Warren and Joe Wilson, Republican and Democrat, God bless them, seemed to be the only people in Washington, D.C. who realized this and were forcing it forward. And then miraculously, like I was doing a live stream, and like miraculously, like to me anyway, Trump, I assumed these sanctions were going to stay for a long period of time. It's not clear that these sanctions are definitely done. Let me get into the minutia of that. Okay, so since the 1970s, at least, probably before that, well, I guess the sanctions mechanism sort of changed and became more formalized in the 70s and 80s. But since the United States has been doing sanctions on a large scale, we've been sanctioning Syria. And this definitely stepped up during the Syrian civil war. However, things got dramatically worse in 2020 after Assad had basically won the Syrian civil war. There are sanctions, like the United States sanctions basically everybody. We've got sanctions against allies like Turkey. We've got sanctions against China, but they are targeted. They're small-scale sanctions.
Well, quite often it can be over an individual or something.
Exactly. Like an individual or a particular section of government or this, that, and the other thing. Then there is the nuclear option that we really only put up against like Cuba, which is very different because the Cuba sanctions or embargo predates the modern sanction legislature. Anyway, I don't need to get in the minutiae there. But really, Venezuela, Iran, Syria, and Cuba are the only.
North Korea?
I don't think North Korea is hit as hard because
Wow.
because there's the scope. I think there's scope for South Korea to like work with North Korea or not work with North Korea, depending on where their politics are. No, it is absolutely nuclear. It doesn't just say U.S. businesses can't do business with Syria. It says no business on the planet can do any business with Syria. After Assad won the Syrian civil war and these nuclear sanctions were applied, even though the fighting had largely stopped, more of the Syrian population became dependent on outside aid because just business shut down in the country.
Yeah.
Assad was a murderous dictator. He was never popular, but by 2020, enough of the Syrian population was just like, oh, for the love of, let's just stop this and let's just let Assad rebuild the country. He could not build the country. These nuclear sanctions worked. They are the reason why after 5 years of Syria not being allowed to rebuild anything, the Assad regime fell in 2025. So what's important here, the distinction here is that Trump saying the sanctions are gone and the Treasury Secretary that runs all the sanctions through OFAC can get rid of almost all of the sanctions that have been applied since the 1970s, except for the nuclear sanctions, because those are congressionally mandated.
Mm-hmm.
So like a lot of things, Trump versus Congress, and weirdly, I guess almost uniquely, I'm on Trump's side on this one, because if Trump doesn't put the legislative wherewithal, the administrative weight, have guys in his offices working with Elizabeth Warren and Joe Wilson to get this done, even if Trump has announced the removal of these sanctions, they're still legally there. And if that uncertainty persists, it doesn't matter if, Donald Trump becomes God dictator of the world, nobody's going to do any trade with Syria
Mm-hmm.
if a Democrat's going to come in and all of a sudden those laws are still enforced. Does that make sense? Hey, Rory, do you like the More Freedom Foundation?
I do.
Would you like us to keep being able to do the More Freedom Foundation?
That's something I think is a wonderful idea. Could you please tell me more?
The way to do that would be to sign up for Patreon. Patreon is a crowdfunding service, kind of like Kickstarter, except it allows you to send us a certain amount of money every month.
Are there any benefits I get if I sign up to Patreon?
There is a Discord server, which is just for Patreon members. Folks love it over there. We got a lot of really smart folks talking about the news of the day. I find it really useful for my research sometimes. So we've got that Discord server, and we've got not one, but 2 patrons-only events every month. We've got the patrons-only newscast, where patrons suggest stuff that I should look into, and I provide sort of a capsule update for the month. And then we have, on the Discord server, we have a chat with me and the patrons.
So if you have ever wanted to be in my position asking Rob questions, then there's your chance.
There you go. Yeah. So that is available only to people who sign up on Patreon. I hope you'll join us there.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But realistically, would Turkey be someone that would jump at the chance, since this is basically their guy in charge of Syria, to sort of rebuild and invest in Syria if it did ever get the go-ahead and the sanctions were lifted?
So that's the crucial distinction, is that Turkey has always been supportive of the sort of group that has taken over Syria, will continue to be supportive of. But there's a distinction between what the Turkish government can do and will continue to do. Definitely to an extent that the UAE government or the Saudi government that wants to support these guys, they would be dissuaded by these sanctions. The Turkish government won't be dissuaded from supporting the Syrian government by these sanctions. That's for sure. However, Turkish business absolutely will. So all the Turkish businesses who want to come in and rebuild Syria also want to do business in Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
Also want to do business with. So if it doesn't matter if the Turkish government, which it already was, is let's rebuild Syria, the sanctions have been lifted. I am applauding and I'm surprised and pleased and amazed that Donald Trump decided to throw his weight behind lifting these sanctions. But I want to emphasize that it is not done. It is something that the Congress needs to vote on getting rid of these. If, as Trump should be capable of doing, he can force all the Republicans to vote to lift the Caesar sanctions, there are at least 20, 25 Democrats who can be convinced that, oh my God, obviously we're going to let the guys who beat Assad not be sanctioned the way Assad was. And I think that this is so totally doable, but this is a test of the baseline competence of the Trump administration's foreign policy career. So is Trump just going to say this and nothing's ever going to happen? Or are they going to actually work with Elizabeth Warren and Joe Wilson to get these congressional nuclear sanctions that are distinct from all the more basic stuff that the president can just they're gone now, technically, but the actual like nuclear sanctions have to be lifted by Congress. Yeah, but it's a tremendously positive step. And like these sanctions, their point was it was understood before 9/11, and I think is very much still the case, that sanctions, especially sanctions like this that can be portrayed as a blockade, are war. They are acts of war. They are war.
Oh,
To
absolutely.
starve a country to death is war. That is what the United States has been doing to Syria. Like our civil war initially failed. The jihadists that we funded and created the Islamic State, that failed to unseat Assad. And then in 2020, we continued our war against Assad through these sanctions. Israel desperately wanted us to keep these sanctions. The Biden administration the Biden administration only really had a month to do it. So I can't be too angry at them.
And he forgot what the country was.
Exactly. So I can't be too mad at them for not lifting the sanctions between the fall of the Assad government, December 7th, and him leaving office in January 20th. But for the first 4 months of the Trump administration, no mention at all of lifting these sanctions. And I think it absolutely was hardcore lobbying from MBS of Saudi Arabia and Erdogan of Turkey. Two other gentlemen I am not traditionally
Fans of.
but if they are allowing Syria to try to reunify and rebuild, this is despite the fact that the sanctions are rarely mentioned in respect to Syria, like the sanctions are the main fact of the Syrian war for the past 5 years. And that main fact of the Syrian war was continuing because of Israeli lobbying, because of defense industry lobbying. If Ahmad al-Shara, this is the former al-Qaeda guy who took over Syria, if he manages to unify the country, the Islamic State disappears. Like it's just gone. And that is not, the Pentagon does not want that, because the Pentagon wants to keep bombing the Islamic State. So Trump isn't just pissing off Israel, he's pissing off all of Washington, D.C., the entire military industrial complex, by taking the step that was necessary to allow Syria to reunify and rebuild. So that is, I believe, if he can pull this off, if he can actually get the Caesar sanctions lifted through Congress, which he should be able to do as the leader of the Republican Party, and on a topic that's actually he can get plenty of bipartisan support on, if he can do that, he will truly have ended Barack Obama's war on Syria, killed 500,000 people. And that is, as much as I dislike Donald Trump, as terrified as I am of what he's doing to domestic politics, that would be an extraordinary victory. And that's why, when we were just going to talk about Yemen and like how dumb Trump's administration was, I was content to do a much more standard anti-Trump podcast. But like, dude potentially ended 2 decade-long wars in a week. And that's, I as much as it pains me to do it, I gotta go. I gotta say thank you if he can continue pulling this off.
Well, he is victorious in Yemen.
Yes. So I guess that brings us to this article: why Trump suddenly declared victory over the Houthi militia. And Trump, I think actually here, Trump has won a great victory. Certainly not against the Houthi militia. The Houthi militia has won, essentially. The Houthi militia.
Well, sadly, the Houthi are used to this because of Saudi Arabia has been bombing them for how long? So this is kind of just like how they roll.
Yeah. And this is what we talked about this about a month ago in our podcast episode, just castigating these morons for thinking that they could do any better. But Trump legitimately deserves applause because he watched this for a month and he said F this. This is a waste of money and resources, and we're done. We're done here.
Do you think the footage There's very well. It's not grisly because you kind of don't see. There's like the wedding party of like 100 people in a circle, and then you see them hit it, and it's just like a big explosion. They've hit in Yemen. What do you think stuff like that, affected him, or was it just kind of like this is expensive and stupid?
It actually very thank you for mentioning that. I never got the full story on what that was because he tweeted that out, right? Like, confidential, like, footage of the US murdering a whole bunch of people. He was like, "Oh, they're
Because
Houthis."
they were, yeah, they're training and stuff. It turned out to be a wedding ceremony.
Did we get confirmation of that? Because I never saw, but basically everyone looked at that footage and was like, "That looks like a traditional, like,
Yeah.
tribal gathering, and you just murdered a bunch of people." And he's like, "Well, I thought it was the Houthis." So I didn't, what did it turn out to be a wedding gathering? I wouldn't be too surprised. What did happen that is mentioned in this article is that and I don't think this was probably as big a part of Trump's calculation as the amount of U.S. material being lost. But yes, there was a horrific U.S. bombing of a migrant center. So we basically killed like dozens of probably Ethiopian, Somali refugees who were trying to make their way across Yemen to the Gulf. So yeah, we definitely murdering dozens and dozens of Yemenis and folks from other countries to absolutely no purpose. So just a little brief Yemen history here. So Yemen, interestingly, was for the Democrats, and even Biden, while he was campaigning, was being against the U.S.'s murderous campaign in Yemen. Though during the Trump administration, U.S. planes weren't dropping bombs on Yemen. What was happening since the last years of the Obama administration, was the United States was providing all kinds of intelligence and refueling support for a really horrific Saudi and UAE war against the Houthis in Yemen. This is a war that the Saudis and the UAE lost pretty spectacularly with that 2019 attack I was talking about. And then again in 2022, the hostilities really flared up one last time, and the Houthis bombed an F1 race, a car race in Jeddah, and the UAE, which is even further away than Saudi Arabia is, at the same time. And at that point, basically, Saudi Arabia and the UAE gave up. But during the first Trump administration, the Democrats loved to throw Yemen in Trump's face because he was supporting what was a horrific conflict that is estimated to have killed 300,000 Yemenis. So it made it particularly disappointing when Joe Biden came into office and first he made some real steps, tried to facilitate conversations between the Saudis and the Houthis, this, that, and the other thing. And then I guess, was it October or November of 2023, the Houthis started blockading Red Sea shipping to protest the genocide in Gaza. And Joe Biden, who had campaigned against war in Yemen, actually stepped up the war in Yemen far beyond what was happening under Obama and the first Trump administration. So for about a year, Rory, the Biden administration was lightly bombing Yemen, which is, of course, horrific and stupid, the idea that you can lightly bomb a place. But they
Oh yeah,
were,
yeah.
over a year, they wasted $1 billion with munitions and whatnot. So what happened, and what we all got to see the inside of, thanks to Signalgate, thanks to no longer National Security Advisor Michael Waltz sending his contact information sending an invitation to a Signal chat to the Jeffrey Goldberg, the editor of The Atlantic, I believe.
And then other people just random
just
family.
just a bunch of random people. No, that's Hegseth, which is distinct from Walls. Hegseth is his own particular nightmare. As we saw, we got the details of that. The approach by Michael Walls and Pete Hegseth seems to be a bit of a cipher who's drunk all the time, and this is the Secretary of Defense, and can be sort of pushed in any direction. They were all very excited about, those Biden people are just weaklings, and we're going to show them what for. And apparently, Michael Kurilla, a guy I didn't really have an opinion of and now have no respect for, is the head of CENTCOM, the U.S. Central Command, the sort of Middle East military guy, had this big plan where we were going to get super tough, and we were going to shut down the Houthis, and then Europe was going to have to pay us because we did them this great service of reopening the Red Sea. And so Biden spent $1 billion over a year of pointless attacks on the Houthis. Kurilla and Hegseth and Walsh under Trump spent $1 billion in a single month.
And they also lost a lot of Reaper drones, MQ-9 Reaper drones. These are like your classic Obama-era drone wars, Afghanistan drones about the size of a Cessna. I'm sure your, Ryan Macbeth would let on that, oh, they've served their time and the intel they've gathered from this is incredible, but they're still very expensive and they exploded.
Yeah, $30 million a pop on the 7 Reaper drones we lost, $70 million or $67 million a pop on the FA-18 Super Hornets that we lost.
Did you lose 2 of them?
2 of them. Yep, 2 of them.
So yeah, one fell off when it was doing maneuvers, and the other one did the classic, it missed the cable and fell into the sea.
Yep. And it's really important to emphasize, as I underlined here, the U.S. strikes burned through $1 billion of weapons and munitions. That's just the weapons and munitions. That's
not
just
fuel or
that's not
crewmen and all that.
fuel. That's not salaries. That's not crewmen. That's not the opportunity cost of having 2 carrier groups there. Yeah, so $1 billion dramatically underestimates the amount of money that was spent on this. And the United States had not even established air superiority over the Houthis, which is a really interesting dynamic.
Because it's one of the few things America can do quite easily is air superiority.
Well, see, that's the thing, Ray. It's one of the things we used to be able to do.
Oh.
And actually, this Yemen failure by the Trump administration is actually, and it is a failure by the Trump administration. It is not a failure of Donald Trump. They were going to do this under the second Biden administration. Kurilla already had these plans going. And Joe Biden has this famous quote from somebody asked him, like, so is the bombing of the Houthis working at all? And he says, like, absolutely not. And they're going to keep going.
Oh my goodness.
Pointless, and we're going to keep doing it. And I think Joe Biden's, or certainly Kamala Harris, would have probably started this plan and would have allowed it to continue for the 8 to 10 months. So that's 8 to 10 months of these kinds of costs, these kinds of constant risks. One of the most extraordinary revelations of this article that is getting a lot of play, because it's just one of those sort of throwaway documents, is that in those first 30 days, the Houthis shot down 7 American MQ-9 drones, hampering Subtrocan's ability to track and strike the militant group. Several American F-16s and an F-35 fighter jet were nearly struck by Houthi air defenses.
Yeah. That would suggest it maybe hit near a ship, and those were the ones closest to the missile that got intercepted, or maybe just hit the water?
No. So several American F-16s and an F-35 fighter jet were nearly struck by Houthi air defenses. This means that these incredibly expensive, what makes the F-35 supposedly worth the $2 trillion we've wasted on this thing is because it's super stealthy and nobody can see it. The Chinese won't know what's coming. The poorest effing country in the Middle East, one of the poorest countries in the world, almost shot down an F-35. These planes are worthless. Like they are, and I sort of annotated to this paragraph, end of an era. The drone war that Obama initiated, Trump vastly accelerated in his first term, and Biden, to his credit, Genocide Joe does deserve credit for a few things, did slow down massively. The drone war era is ending not because the United States discovered new, positivity and became happy people, because we can't do it anymore. If Yemen can almost shoot down an F-35, we're done. There's no...
The ideas that I've seen is basically an F-35 will be like the commanding hub. So you'll have a human in one of those, and then it might be connected to 5 or 6 sort of drone version F-35s that can then do much more dangerous things.
Military technology is not my thing, because I believe as this campaign is proving, Rory, it's all BS. This is, one of the reasons I don't get into military, whatever. But I think what you were describing is what they're planning for the F-47. Because this 5th generation, the F-35 has cost us $2 trillion, is worthless, doesn't do anything well, but they're now already building the 6th generation, and they're just telling us less about the process because it was so embarrassing, the information they provided about the F-35 process. But no, I mean, this is a key thing here. The tough guys were allowed to be taken off the leash and really show what they could do in Yemen, And what they really showed that they could do in Yemen was nothing. They actually have illustrated this entire Yemen imbroglio has demonstrated that the U.S. Navy is pretty useless, the aircraft carriers are pretty useless, and now it's demonstrated that the F-35 is pretty useless, which is kind of extraordinary. And if Joe Biden were president or Kamala Harris were president, we'd probably be doing this fight until an aircraft carrier got sunk, until an F-35 got shot out of the sky. If an F-35 got shot out of the sky, Rory, like, that would be calamity by the Houthis.
Yeah.
Like, that would just be like, that would be the end. It wouldn't be the end of the F-35 market, because I think most of the people who buy F-35s today understand that they are crap planes, but it's about buying into the U.S. security envelope umbrella. But if this war had been allowed to continue, and Donald Trump, in his God help me wisdom, kept it from continuing, if this had been allowed to continue, it would have very conclusively demonstrated that U.S. military equipment is entirely useless. And it kind of did. But I do think that Donald Trump, like, really deserves credit for stopping this. Apparently, he demanded 31 days in, he demanded a progress report. According to this article, the progress report that the Pentagon was capable of producing was just the numbers of bombs they had dropped.
Wow.
Like, that was their measure of progress, was how many munitions we've wasted.
So it shows how bad the intel was, because you're not aware of who you've killed and really what you've bombed.
Yeah. Well, and there are competing intelligence agencies in the United States, which I think is actually, to an extent, a good thing. And the other intelligence agencies were like, yes, we've done this for a month. We've spent $1 billion. We've lost 2 fighter jets. We've lost all these Reaper drones, and we have not impacted Houthi activities at all. The fact that they were able to carry out their most impressive strike against Israel after a full month and a half of this is a great indicator of that. So I am, of course, appalled by everybody in the Trump administration. I'm appalled by the decision. I mean, we are 2 podcasters, Rory, and we predicted how this would go in greater detail than anybody in Trump's cabinet and anybody in the U.S. intelligence community.
Yeah, but
because
we don't have bloodlust. Like, when you hear about Hegseth, the way he talks about it, it is very disturbing.
It's bloodlust, and it's also just the desperate conviction that they're doing something worthwhile, which they're not. And it's not like, so anybody could have seen this, but we definitely saw this, and we said so, that this would be a ludicrous joke. But Donald Trump stopped it, and that actually took, maybe not courage is the word, but that took judgment, that took common sense, that Joe Biden, of course, signally failed to illustrate throughout the last 18 months of his presidency, or however many months since Gaza started.
Do you buy much credit in the idea that Donald Trump wants a Nobel Peace Prize, and he's doing a lot of this in order to get one?
I think he would love a Nobel Peace Prize. That's for freaking sure. I think he ran on peace. He ran on no new wars. And he's learning that he can't. I would argue, the standard approach is, Putin wants war to continue. It's like actually the U.S. oil industry really needs war to continue. We saw there's been a lot of rumored talk. And if Donald Trump does this, like, he honestly becomes the best foreign policy president of the 21st century, which says nothing. But still, clearly does this. There's been a lot of talk about a deal between the United States and Iran, basically restarting the JCPOA that Trump ripped up.
If everybody says it's a better deal than Obama's, then he'd be delighted.
Yeah, that's really, and I think that I've seen some discussion that they're going to set up some kind of, because the Saudis and the Iranians now work together, they're going to set up some kind of ridiculous thing where, like, Iran can keep its, like, Iran and Saudi Arabia are going to comply on enriching uranium, are going to cooperate on enriching uranium in, like, an island in the Persian Gulf or something.
Wow.
And Iran so Iran technically still has enrichment capabilities. They'll put all their stuff in storage. Someone had talked about that. And that, I guess, would, like, technically be a slightly different deal than the JCPOA that could be sold to Trump as better. But, I mean, the JCPOA was an extraordinary deal for the United States. We give up nothing. Iran gives up everything.
As you said before, it was like how America would have dealt with the Native Americans.
Pretty much, yeah. No, yeah, it was absolutely like And it's extraordinary that it was sold to somehow the only Americans that the JCPOA was bad for was 4 defense companies that wanted a war with Iran. Just with the Russia thing, we saw that the bare rumors, I mean, more substantive rumors than we've gotten in a couple months or years, of U.S.-Iran peace tanked the already titanically low oil market by like another 3%. Oil went down like another 3%. So peace with Russia just isn't happening because that would, $10 a barrel oil or whatever. This is to answer your question, like why is he going for peace in the Middle East? Because he had to go for peace somewhere. And it's just so easy. Like, yeah, it's funny. Yeah, because you had mentioned like the Middle East is sold as this incredibly intractable problem. The United States is the problem. Like,
Yeah.
it's really like it's very straightforward. And if we stop the genocide in Gaza, the Red Sea could be opened again. It is key to emphasize that. Like we were talking about in that call, they're like, oh, we're gonna clear out the Red Sea. The Red Sea has not been cleared out. The Houthis have agreed to stop firing missiles at U.S. military ships. And I think they actually haven't, I think since December, the December ceasefire, they haven't actually been going after neutral shipping much.
Okay.
But that doesn't matter because it's still very unsecure, and no insurance company is going to allow people to go through there. It's just not a possibility. And they have since, with no reaction from the United States, which is, I think, appropriate, since the May 6th announcement of peace with Yemen, the Houthis have struck Israel again, or at least attempted to. Maybe it was averted. So yeah, Israel and Yemen are still at war, and Donald Trump has the courage, the sanity to say, that's Israel's problem, not mine. And yes, Israel is really, really pissed off about that, just as they're really, really pissed off about the fact that Donald Trump met with, God bless Ahmed al-Shara, the guy we used to call Jelani, who literally 6 months ago was on a U.S. kill list with a $10 million bounty on his head, and this past week met with Donald Trump, the president of the United States.
How did you find the Syrian president?
Great. Right, I think very good. Young, attractive guy, tough guy.
Well, I can see Trump has I think Trump really doesn't get like bureaucracy, so he does like when the kind of dictator or something is a bit like, yeah, I'll do this, I'll give you this, I'll do that because I'm in charge, the buck stops with me. So I can see him being like, yeah, like this guy, he said he'd do the thing.
And he did the thing. I am weirdly, the genocide in Gaza continues. Israel apparently, perhaps in part because it's getting the sense that Trump is sick of their stuff and is perhaps has a sense that they may be forced to cut it out pretty soon. The horror of they're killing 100 people a day in Gaza. It would be perverse to say that.
Well, the footage of starvation is horrific.
Yeah, it'd be
quite
perverse.
Often it's just starving people getting rice, at the front of a queue that's taken how long to get to.
Yeah, it would be perverse to say I was optimistic or happy about the Middle East, but I'm seeing more real hope there than I've seen since October of 2023.
Better than Sleepy Joe?
So much better than Sleepy Joe. And it effing kills me, Rory, that it's Donald Trump that's doing it, but it's definitely Donald Trump who's doing it. Just passages from this article that I guess we're not going to spend as much time going through. It's like, significantly, the men also misjudged their boss's tolerance for military conflict in the region. And it's really is coming down to that, like, we finally have a president who just doesn't want any war.
The way they word that's so strange, because from what I understand, no Americans have died in this, naval bombardment of Yemen. So it's almost a bit like, why is he such a wuss? None of us are even dying. It's such a weird way of, portraying it.
Well, but we're losing equipment at a fast pace, and like that's the thing when you're dealing with fighter jets and naval stuff, where you're at the very end of an era of air and military superiority, is that it all looks fine until if one of these engagements where like the F-18 was lost, had been a little bit different, if like the Houthis had sent like 4 drones and missiles at this thing at one time instead of just 3, they could have sunk an aircraft carrier. They could have, and if you sink an aircraft carrier, you're going instantly from like no U.S. casualties to more U.S. casualties than you had you've seen in certainly any single year and any year of the war on terror, because there's over 1,000 people on every aircraft carrier. And just like I think Trump was perceptive in seeing that like there was nothing positive that could possibly have come out of this. And the stubbornness with which, I haven't seen a ton of it, but I think Democrats are horrifyingly going to be like, oh, Trump was a wuss here, which is just
Oh yeah, it's just a horrendous thing to come out with.
yeah, it's just insane. And also, it's worth talking about, also revealed in this, General Kurilla's plan was an 8 to 10 month campaign where Air Force and Navy warplanes would take out Houthi air defense systems. Then he said U.S. forces would mount targeted assassinations modeled on Israel's recent operation against Hezbollah. So we were going to just go and assassinate the Houthi heads of state.
Two very different countries.
What's that?
Palestine and Yemen?
Well, no, Lebanon.
Oh,
and
apologies.
Yemen. And this is this
Still quite a very different scenario, because you're still going to need like the Marines to do an assault onto the beaches, which is tricky. Obviously they can do it, but it's still a step, and then I don't know.
No, I
it's
think
mayhem.
the targeted assassinations they were talking about were just death from above.
I thought you were getting boots on the ground sort of thing.
But this is like, I'm pretty sure that's still technically illegal, and of course the U.S. government would maintain that the Houthis are not actually the government of Yemen, which is a lie, which is nonsense. Nonsense that is, unfortunately, like the Houthis are the government of Yemen. So basically his big smart plan was to assassinate the heads of a government, as if that would do anything other than make them
Worked
angrier.
great for Colonel Gaddafi.
Yeah, it's just it's lunacy. It is lunacy. I'm pretty sure it's still, even though it's still kind of illegal. And the idea that you would model anything after this nasty little apartheid genocide state is just like a sign of like how far the U.S. military certainly has fallen, and just how far my country has fallen. I noticed this detail. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, this is the famous drunk who likes to pardon U.S. war criminals, named the campaign Operation Rough Rider, which is a callback to Teddy Roosevelt, which is it's I'm not somebody who thinks that U.S. empire is nearing its end. I think it's quite transparently obvious that like U.S. military empire is over. I think that Yemen and this in particular has proven that. But I think there's a poetry. So Operation Rough Rider is Teddy Roosevelt's group in the Spanish-American War that ran up a hill in Cuba or something like that, and was part of like the origins of U.S. imperialism, Teddy Roosevelt's reputation. So I think it is sort of history repeating as farce, or pathetic farce, that this last pointless, rather disgusting little military endeavor was named Operation Rough Rider, going all the way back to the Spanish-American War. It is interesting. Folks are making this case. In fact, this failed Yemen war makes an attack on Iran a lot less likely, because what they've done against one of the poorest countries in the world is demonstrate how useless all these tools are. So anybody who's trying to make a case that, oh yeah, we're going to take out their program and it's going to be simple and easy with no ramifications, like, oh, you're going to do that against Iran? Like, why did none of that work against Yemen? Yeah, I mean, I guess that's something else to be grateful for.
But does this bring up what you've always worried about that will happen in America, is what happened to the British Empire? Is it's constantly getting in these stupid little fights around the world to the point where it can't win them all?
Well, certainly this is an example of that, Rory. But like, if it becomes, as I think it is becoming known, that we not only can't win them, like we can't actually have any impact other than to waste a lot of money and munitions. I think absolutely our engagement with Syria was a pointless war that made us weaker and made the region weaker, and was just bad for everybody except for weapons companies. And Trump seems to finally be ending that. This, as is illustrated in this New York Times article, which I would again highly recommend, this was exactly that kind of pointless war that we shouldn't get into. And honestly, I am so delighted that it appears to be over this quickly. My fear, Rory, was that we were going to be doing this for 4 years, and we were going to be doubling down, and we were going to. It's interesting. Apparently, again, because he's an idiot, the defense secretary was trying to rally the internationally recognized government? It's always a really interesting question to me, the extent to which these people believe their own lies. And it does appear like the Trump administration really still kind of believes the lie that there's some kind of internationally recognized government in Yemen that's actually the real power in Yemen, and the Houthis are just this militia group that they can justify assassinating. It's like, no, the Houthis have been the government of Yemen for 12 years now. This is, again, the Pentagon got to learn that again, that there is in fact no useful internationally recognized government. But I do think it is noteworthy and impressive and very un-Joe Biden-like that we learned this lesson in a month and a half instead of 4 years. And as much as it kills me, I think Donald Trump deserves credit for that.
Well, on that somewhat cheery note, we'll catch you next time.
Yes, indeed.
The More Freedom Foundation is also available on YouTube and TikTok. Rob's Twitter is RobOLaw, and he's also written a book called Avoiding the British Empire, What It Was and How the US Can Do Better. And music provided by Kevin MacLeod.